Hi, I'm Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. So here's the situation. I've still got this red eye infection, so I apologise. I haven't been recording videos recently, and also there's been a lot going on, so I just haven't had time. But I've been meaning to check in. I have a cup of tea, which is a peppermint, licorice and lemon balm tea that I find very good. That's a Twinings one that I like. And what I want to do is record a sort of a chatty update video and like a reading horizon. So just what I'm reading at the moment. I've missed October, I think, and November, and now December wrap-ups, and I've lost track of what I read in those months, but I'll try to give you just where we're at in terms of current, reading. Jason's out with the children and he's due back any minute, and then we have to go to a party, a 50th birthday, so this just might not work, but let's try. Let's see how we go. So books that I've read recently, I'll just run through two. One is Dunja's Last Love by Alina Bronksy, translated from the German by Tim Mohr. And this is a gorgeous small book, and we know that I love small books because they're very portable and just it's a book that you feel like you can finish, when you pick it up and you think, well, it's under 200 pages, so it's not too intimidating. And this is about Dunja. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. It could be Dunya, that could be a silent J, I'm not sure. But she goes back to live in her hometown, which is Chernobyl, or Chernobyl. But it's a town that has had the nuclear power disaster, and so it's radioactive, and they all had to leave, but she decides at some point she wants to go back. So this is it's set in recent times, and she's elderly, and then one by one a few other residents come back, so they're not that many of them, maybe 12 or 20 or so they live in a small community, and they're all in the same boat in the sense that they're mainly elderly, various stages of aging, but also they're shunned by the nearby town because they're thought to be radioactive themselves because they're living in that zone. And the book just focuses on Baba Dunya and her day-to-day struggles and the way they build their lives there with their limited means, and they have to make a big trek to go to the town, each time they need supplies, and they have very eccentric personalities, and the characters are gorgeous, but so it's very engaging, and she's one of those authors who gets straight to the point. So it opens with Baba Dunya being woken up by Konstantin, this rooster who lives next door that's his time clock is totally out of whack, so he makes noise at all hours, and she decides she wants to murder Konstantin the rooster. So it's very punchy and draws you in, but it also, I think, makes you, it has that rare thing of featuring an older woman in fiction, which I always like, but also makes you think about how we treat elderly people generally, because even though this is a particular circumstance where they're living in Chernobyl, you could easily set this in a retirement home and have a same collection of characters, and they're sort of ignored or forgotten by wider society. So I thought it could, I think it can be read on different levels. But anyway, I'd be very interested if you have read this to know what you thought, because I don't know anyone else who's read it. I think it was one that I picked up in London on a whim, and I always love the Europa editions. So this one I recommend. That is Baba Dunya. I think I've decided that it's a silent J. Baba Dunya's Last Love by Alina Bronksy. And also I just finished Big Sister, Little Sister, Red Sister by Jung, Chang. And this is about the Sung sisters. So they were three women, all sisters, who had very large roles in China in the 21st 20th century. So one was married to Sun Yat-sen, who was one of the leaders who changed China from having a dynasty and having being run by an emperor to being a republic. And then one was married to Chang Kai-shek, and he was another leader in China after Sun Yat-sen, quite ruthless. The men don't come out of this looking very good at all, I have to say. And then the oldest sister, Ai Ling, was married to another leader in the party, in the Nationalist Party. So Ai Ling and Mei Ling had to go into exile in Taiwan when the communists took over, and the middle sister, Qing Ling, who was the communist sympathiser, then became second in command to Chairman Mao. So it's a very interesting trio of sisters, and it's sort of, that case of truth being stranger than fiction, because as some of the reviews have said, if you made this up, it would seem too much of a coincidence that they all had these quite central roles. So it's really interesting because you then get the history of China, or modern China, woven in to the story, and Chang writes really fluently, and so it has a real narrative drive to it. So it's really a good read, and of course featuring the women, which I thought was interesting, and I think she didn't start off intending that to be the case, but as she was researching Sun Yat-sen, she realised that the story of these sisters was so strong and interesting that she had to make that the focus. So I do recommend it. I found it at times confusing, jumping between them which was which, and I also, not being as familiar with the history of China as I should, despite the fact I do tend to read quite a lot of books about China. I always still need a refresher, and I think she assumes a fair bit of knowledge that's probably fair enough. That's the gaps in my knowledge, but it is really good and gives you a different perspective of that. What has been a very interesting 100 years in China's history, and including going back to a time where they actually did have a limited form of democracy, and you realise that what we see now is not necessarily how it has, well, certainly not how it's always been, and that gives you a different sense of whether it's inevitable that China's political system will always be, the same as it is today. So it's good. It's a good read, and Chang is coming to the Adelaide Writers' Week in March. So Amanda and I will be talking about this tomorrow on the recording tomorrow for the podcast, and then looking forward to hearing her speak. She's a really interesting woman and a wonderful writer. So that is Big Sister, Little Sister, Red Sister. Then I've been reading, I went through this, I decided that I wanted to read everything on my shelf before I bought too many new books, which I know is a futile exercise with Christmas and so on coming up. But this is a book that has been on my shelf for such a long time. It's The Book of Laughter and Forgetting by Milan Kundera. And it's, as you can see from the flags, he's an author who really makes me think. So I have this strange experience reading him. So this talks about some of the events in Prague and Czechoslovakia in 1948, going through to 1968, and he's writing, it was published in 1979 originally, and he left, when did he leave? I think the early 70s, but I could be wrong, but he's an author who will give you parts of the novel will be a little essay or a little non-fiction piece of history and his thoughts on it. So almost like a little political essay, and then it goes into fiction. And so he juxtaposes these really interesting vignettes about things that were happening in Prague at different times, and he's got a wonderful clarity about his prose, and so he'll distill an idea, for example, the way that a powerful state exerts its power by repressing people and repressing voices so that things get forgotten, and so people can't protest or rise up about something if they've forgotten about it or if it has just disappeared. And that made me think of The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, which I read recently, which probably you didn't know because I haven't done my wrap-up videos. But anyhow, that idea of things being forgotten, and then that's how a state can exert its authority. And he will do that just in a sentence or two in this beautiful, clear prose. And I really love that. So you can see all the flags where that gets my mind ticking. And then, then he'll go into a story about Carell, who is having trouble with his wife, and he wonders if maybe the problem is that she's ugly. And you think, oh dear, I don't know what I think about that, but it's interesting because he's deliberately being a little bit absurd and funny, certainly from the man's point of view. And I found his later work to be objectifying women a bit more, or maybe I've noticed it more, but it is there. But it's also, I think, partly he's deliberately juxtaposing something that is a bit absurd and superficial with the political philosophy that is also in the book. And I think there's a point that he's making by doing that. So I've kept reading just because the tone is quite light, and I do find him engaging, but I have that mixed feeling when I read, I have those mixed feelings when I read his books. And I have another one here. So that's the Book of Laughter and Forgetting. And then the other one that I have not read and have been, have had for a long time is Laughable Loves, which has an introduction by Philip Roth. So whilst I think he reads now a little, some of those elements are a bit old-fashioned, I do find Milan Kundera, I like his intellect and I like the clarity of his writing. So I do want to get through them. And set in Czechoslovakia, or at least the first one is, which brings me to one of the books I'm dying to get to over the holidays, which is There Was Still Love by Favel Parrett. And she's an Australian author. I don't know much about this book other than people have been raving about it. And when Annie and I interviewed Heather Rose, who's the author of The Museum of Modern Love and her recent book, which we spoke to her about, Bruni, this is the book that she recommended. And I've heard others rave about it as well. Hi, I'm back. My phone did that thing again where someone tried to call me, so it stopped recording. I have to work out how to get around this issue. But anyhow, I was talking about There Was Still Love by Favel Parrett, and this has been highly recommended, including by Heather Rose, who we interviewed recently for the podcast about her new novel, Bruni. And it's also been on various lists, and the booksellers are recommending it. One of the things that I'm interested in after reading the Milan Kundera books is that it's set partly in Czechoslovakia, in Prague, 1938, and then 1980, and then in Melbourne in 1980. So I think it's a family who moves from Czechoslovakia to Australia, and I can't tell you much more about it, but I think it'll be really interesting to see that history from a different perspective. And she's apparently a wonderful Australian author who I haven't read yet. So this will be my first book by Favel Parrett, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And still on Australian authors, but another one I'm very keen to get to is The Yield by Tara June Winch. So this was Annie's book of the year this year. We did a Books on the Go episode of our best books. Not that you can ever narrow it down really, but we each chose 3, and Annie actually did hers in order. So this came in at number 1, and Tara June Winch is an Australian Aboriginal author who lives in Paris. But this story is a bit similar to Too Much Lip by Melissa Lukashenko. So it's an Aboriginal person who comes back to her hometown, and there's family issues, and there's also a dispute over some land. It features her grandfather who's trying to preserve and pass down their Aboriginal language of their people, their clan, and Annie raved about it. So I'd also heard, it's also been on lots of lists of the best books of 2019. So very keen to get to that one as well. And then, of course, there's the general holiday reading, which is almost a different list altogether. I've got a lot of books on my shelf, and I am going to try to read from my shelf more and try not to buy so many books, because I keep looking at them and there's so many that I really want to get to. So I have Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout and lots of others that might fit into that holiday reading category. So I'll try to do another video about that and update you soon. I hope you have a good festive season and happy reading. I'll see you soon. Bye.